Alrighty, rapid fire history on my printing methods for casings. So I started in the V1, V2 era around this time last year with PA HTCF, and I moved to PA 6CF sometime after that because it had higher stats on paper, but it was too flexy after absorbing water, so I started looking for other avenues. I started getting my hands on PPACF, which was fantastic. It's like 3 times more rigid than anything else I'd printed. But as of late, as those casings have been going out for a while, I've started to see a few failures of PPACF. Not nearly as much as the PA-HTCF V1, V2 era. That was like a 15 to 20% failure rate. This one's only been like 5 to 10. I've had 1 box fail for myself, and I've seen 1 other person's casing fail. So, I'm still very happy with how it's gone, but I have spent the last 3 weeks finding another way to make these things as good as they possibly can be, because I do not want to see another split casing ever again. So here's what I've done. I started experimenting with a bunch of new filaments. I tried polypropylene because I'd read about its ability as a self-healing plastic, but it was enormously too difficult to print. I tried polycarbonate, but even after solving its warping issues, it was still too brittle and would just explode on impact. I tried straight nylon instead of having the carbon fiber infilled versions, and that could not be printed without warping. I tried every technique I knew, didn't work. I knew that I'd tested TPU72D, which is a high durometer TPU, around the same time as I'd started using PPACF, so around 6 months ago. This is my first trial at a high durometer TPU casing, and I immediately gave up on the concept because whilst the walls surrounding the casing were fantastic, it did not protect the internals at all. It was just enormously too thin. So I threw the concept away. But I had the idea. Since all of the PPACF and other varieties of casings were all failing, like around the sides, layers splitting, that kind of thing, I could utilize the multi-material design of the Bambu Labs H2D, utilizing its 2 nozzles to print the internal thin surfaces of a high durometer TPU casing out of PPACF, which is exceptionally rigid, and then the rest of the entire box, even the outside on the bottom, would all be high durometer TPU. This way, all of your walls are decently rigid, but flexy, such that in an impact event, they don't crack. But the insides of the casing are fully rigid, as a PPACF casing would be, to protect all of your internals. And that was the pitch that I came up with, and this is my results when it comes to testing. Oh my gosh, it's been a lot. So I did 2 tests, but the first one that I came up with, which was significantly less scientific, was hurling the casings at a wall to see which ones would explode the most or the least. This is what happened to PCTG after 1 throw. This is the biggest lump that's left. And you can see that it failed along the layers quite decently, but it was also very isotropic as well, which is what is quite good about PCTG. It's got good layer adhesion, but this is clearly a budget plastic as it's intended to be. Next up was PPACF. This is the largest piece that was left. Whilst this is an incredibly tough filament and extremely rigid, when it's unprotected and hurled at a wall by me, it doesn't last. So, whilst it does have a low failure rate out in the field, we can do better than this. PA-HTCF stood up a little bit better than PPA, actually. I think that's due to its lower rigidity. It's going to be less brittle, but it's definitely more flexible and that's what happened after one throw. So, rip. Then I started testing TPU. So I didn't throw this one, but this is a TPU 72D with PPACF hybrid casing after, I think, 3 or 4 throws. And you can see that it has failed along the edge in that thin section where it's mating to the PPA plastic. And it had a decent amount of failure and mostly only hit this side, which is where it's weakest anyway. What's interesting is the failure is extremely isotropic. So you can see the inside here is very broken, but in a way that almost looks injection molded. It's not sheared along layers like a normal 3D print is. It's failed like a hard rubber, which it is. But this isn't nearly as well as I thought it would do. I was thinking it would be, you know, invincible. I did some extra thinking and I was like, right, okay, maybe because I've mostly printed this solid, it's got 6 walls to it. Perhaps it's too rigid and it can't flex enough to absorb impact. So I thought I needed to do more testing. And then my other thought was, those casings which I held at the wall all print at around 250 to 220 grams of filament. TPU is much more dense. This prints at around 350 grams of filament per casing. And my scientific throwing against a wall, usually I just try to throw the boxes at around the same speed. So you could make an estimate there that if this is being thrown at the same speed because it's 50% heavier, this is hitting the wall with 50% more energy. So if it's surviving 3 or 4 impacts with 50% more energy imparted onto it, then it must be a better plastic, right? But that wasn't good enough for me, so I did some other tests. What I ended up doing was printing a bunch of these cubes, 2 in PPACF with 2 walls and 6 walls, and then also 2 in TPU 68 geometer, sorry, TPU 68D with 2 walls and 6 walls, of course, to test whether having less walls would result in more flex and better impact protection. And instead of throwing these at the wall, I instead crushed them under a 40 kilogram block. And the results of that were obviously fun, but pretty interesting. And let's drop it from there. Nothing is left. TPU 72D. Whew. Gone. But that held together. Let's do now the 6-wall PPACF with higher infill. I'm gonna go there and see ya. Same result. Not as bad. 6-wall TPU 72D. It's gonna be landing there. Here we go. And drop. Oh yeah. Would you look at that? Holy crap, it's actually very decently crushed, but that right there is what you want. So the 2-wall TPU 68D block ended up getting completely crushed, as did both of the PPACF blocks. They did not survive at all. But the TPU 68D block, that actually ended up surviving its first impact, which is excellent. And then it started splitting on its second and had almost completely split in half after its 4th impact. Let's try it again. So, no, a bit further back. Okay. There, that's a good landing. Okay, here we go. Second impact on the 6-wall TPU. Oh, she's going. One more. That is thoroughly messed up. One more. I don't think it's getting much worse than that. Let's have a look here. There's your result. You can clearly see the infill percentage. It was around 30%. But the 6 walls seriously helped. It's hard for me to split by hand, but damn, son. Which then, of course, tells me that it's a significantly more impact-resistant plastic than PPACF, and increasing the wall count is effective. So That's what I learned from this testing. I also learned some other stuff. This was a casing that I tried to print out of a lower durometer TPU, thinking that it would be more resilient as well because it's more flexible and, you know, it might not split in the same way that the 68D TPU did. I also infilled it with PLA just to test how it would affect its rigidity, and it did well, but the TPU 65A is just so flexible that it's not going to hold up well around the walls. So I gave up on that concept, and I'm just going to stick to the higher durometers anyway. So yeah, this could be done if you want a casing that's never going to break, but the amount of protection that you're going to gather from this might not be fantastic. Probably good if you're using a smaller battery in a bigger box with a lot of foam, and you want a casing that's just never going to have issues of cracking, like a spare trick board or something like that. This would be excellent, but for the majority, I don't think it's going to be ideal. It's also worth noting, I'm of course using the Bambu Labs H2D dual nozzle functionality to print PPACF internally on its flat areas, and then TPU 68D around all of the walls. But that's a necessary functionality to print carbon fiber alongside TPU. If you tried to feed both through a singular nozzle using something like an X1 carbon and an AMS, then you would end up with, like, you know, filament overlap and the carbon fibers just clogging the nozzle and causing the TPU to fail at some point. I'd be very surprised if that didn't happen, but you could probably use a non-carbon fiber, non-abrasive filament like PETG, or something like that, maybe tough PLA inside a casing if you were printing this yourself. You wanted really good results, but you know, that's probably the best that you can get out of a single nozzle system instead. So yeah, of course, after all of my findings and all of my testing here, I'm going to be getting out this as the primary printing method for all of my casings on the site. I think I'll also be moving towards making all of the lids for the casings just black. I'll have a full black stock for those parts. And because TPU can come in a range of colors, I'll start printing the full casings themselves in a different color instead. That's gonna allow for, you know, more control on my end for the color of my products, because I have had a bunch of anodizing issues come up as of late. So if I just stick to one color for machined parts, and you know, I can then vary up the printing process and the colors of the things that I make, and that's just going to be a much cooler feature, I think. Before I forget as well, this is a PPACF casing. Of course you saw this explode, but you know, the rigidity of it is fantastic. You can see it still flexes a bit. I haven't removed the supports off of this one yet, but this is a TPU 72D PPACF hybrid torque casing. It's quite flexy around the walls because they've got less support, but you can see that the middle flexes almost as much as a PPACF box. So it's got the best of both, realistically. Great impact protection with decent rigidity as well. One other thing that I've tested that I forgot to mention is the waterproofness of these boxes. I have tested this casing here, fully bolted to a lid with a low durometer TPE gasket, and I fully waterlogged it up to the gasket line, and it stayed sealed underwater for about half an hour, and there was absolutely no water ingress. So there is no chance that this casing is going to end up being less waterproof than any of my other boxes. So I think that's good. In fact, of course, it should be more waterproof because it's not going to crack. So yeah, that's pretty good. Damn, this took a solid 3 weeks. I went through a lot of spools and a lot of printing time. So, you know, I'm lucky that this didn't delay things too much because I've been printing other stuff like a maniac for the last couple of months. So it's good, but now I can take these results and apply them to my work. And all of you guys can too. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. And I don't think that a better result can be achieved with a 3D printer. So that's pretty good.